Hey, Reena, how you doing?
I am well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Thanks for joining in.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
It's probably the quickest we've ever decided, hey, when are you going to do it and book it? Like it was like within what, 3 hours? We are like, hey, let's do it this afternoon.
Yeah, I actually love people that roll like that because sometimes that's all the availability that I have. So
Right? No,
you
I
never
feel the
know when
same
you can
way.
hop on an opportunity, right?
Right. I apologize if my voice sounds a little scratchy or whatever. I am like dealing with some sinuses, some allergy issues, or whatever it is. So like I got water and some hot tea in a cup. So I'm like trying to get through this. But
Oh man.
I see Better Call Daddy. Now we're gonna get to the podcast, but I gotta ask: is this a take on the Better Call Saul type of thing? Because it has somewhat the same logo.
Yeah, so it was kind of a take on that. And
Uh,
then it was a little bit of I always call my dad for advice. So he is literally always who I call. And
okay.
so, yeah, that's where that came from. And then at the end of the show, I let all of my guests ask my dad a question. And then, when I edit the whole thing together, he responds to their questions. So that's kind of like a Jerry Springer final thought.
Mm,
And Jerry Springer started my career. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of different
right.
things in the title and the meaning of the show.
Right, which we will get into you being on the Jerry Springer show. But you mentioned something interesting, which was, the guests that you have on your show, they ask your dad a question. Now, have there ever been any kind of awkward moments or awkward questions where you're like, there is no way I'm going to ask my dad that?
I've been pretty open to all of the questions. Nobody's really pushed the boundaries, although I will say there have been a couple of guests that didn't like my dad's reaction. They felt a little bit offended by his stance. And my reaction to that was, hey, you want to hop on another episode and my dad's happy to go on live with you and we can talk that out further. Or, that's my dad's experience with the information that you presented. And not everyone is going to agree with how you've experienced that subject.
In better terms, it's an opinion, people.
Exactly.
You ask a question,
There.
you want his true answer. He's going to give it to you.
Yeah.
People don't like when people are real and they give real answers. Like I've had people come on before, and I ask this
Yeah.
question, or they ask me a question, however it goes, and I'm just like real, and then they're like, "Well, that kind of makes me look at you less." Why? Because I answered a question legitimately and honestly, and that shows what type of person you are versus what type of person I am. You know?
There needs to be more nuance for sure. You know, I will say one of the subjects was I brought on a guy who was a sperm donor to 25 children.
Mm.
What's interesting is that my dad wanted to have more children and considered actually wanting to donate his sperm. But after hearing this guy who had, given his sperm and 25 children had come into fruition from that, and him not really being a part in those kids' lives and just thinking he can get all those kids together once a year and have a little shindig, my dad didn't really like that. He was like, maybe it's better I didn't do that because I think that those children deserve his attention and to be in their life. And it made my dad really think differently about that. And at different stages of your life, you feel different on certain
Mm-hmm.
opinions. So maybe if he was in his 20s, my dad might have still considered doing that, right?
So your dad wanted to
But in
have
his
like 25
60s,
children?
he wasn't having kids, and my mom was done after 3, and she made sure that he wasn't going to have any more. And it was a point of contention.
Yeah.
But yeah, he didn't necessarily agree with having 25, and he was questioning whether there was ego involved in that.
Right.
um,
Right. I think everybody suffers with an ego problem, whether it be positive or negative. And I think, like my ego would be, and I figured this out kind of a little bit, maybe a couple of weeks ago. because I'm trying to open up a business in my hometown, and I just don't really know how to do that on the store side. So I was like, I'm going to have to come into some investors or something. But then I was like, I can't ask people for money. I can't ask people for this. And then I realized, wait, my ego is getting too big. I shouldn't feel the guilt in having to ask for partnerships. You know what I mean? And things that I want to do that's going to further also their career. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What do you want to open up?
I want to open up a music shop. When I mean a music shop, I mean so yes, I've answered this question from my family members a lot, and they're like, is it sustainable? For the first couple of years, yes, and I'll tell you why. Vinyl records are now on the verge. They're becoming the new thing.
They are coming back.
Cassette tapes are coming back. I don't know if people realize that. New artists are putting out cassette tapes along with digital and vinyls. And I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. And then now there's been like a 15% raise in the stocks of CDs. So I'm like, they're coming back slowly but surely. But, it's more than just a music shop. You can put it in there. You can make it a music shop. You can make it a nerd shop, whatever you want to do, and gradually grow. Like I have like a 6-month plan. Like, okay, if it's here by this 6 month, that means we can start, renting equipment, and we can have like a studio because we have local musicians in our area. I'm like, hey, they can come in and record some lines or do whatever they need to do. They'll pay us for their services. We'll have an engineer in here doing this stuff. And then who knows, maybe rent out some instruments and sell those there and there. There's a plethora or a hodgepodge of sorts of things you can do with a music or an entertainment-based shop. And
100%. I mean, you could have shows, you could do live streams, you could do podcasts, you could do music performances, all of that.
It's something that the only thing we have close to that's a pawn shop, like within like a 75, 80 mile radius. And I'm like,
wow,
we're missing out here. Like it's a small town, but if people are going to go all the way over there for, to buy a guitar, why not do it here? Because they're going to buy it either way, So I got a couple of meetings here in a couple of weeks to kind of get with some of my friends that actually know how to do that stuff. Like they own like 15, 16 shops in town. And I'm like, we just need to get together. You own 51%. I'll own 49. I will buy you out in the next couple of years. And those would be mine 100%. I just need help getting off the ground. You know what I mean?
I think you should definitely try. I mean, look at all of what you're doing now. How many episodes have you done? Hundreds.
Yeah, this will be putting yours up tomorrow. So this is going to be like almost 470, 469, something like that. So
that's a huge commitment. And I would say if you can do that, why can't you help others create shows or content? Right. And that would pay for a shop.
Yeah, I keep in mind, we've done this 400 episodes with no payment. I've been doing this by myself for free. And then recently we got Deno Seasoning jumping on, and I'm getting a little bit of cash from them guys.
I love the ad.
It's crazy.
I loved it.
Because it's just amazing what you can do. And I want to get to your story here in a minute. I don't want to tell your story to you or tell my story on my show. But it's like it's crazy what you can do when you start from nothing. Nobody knew who I was. I'm not Kevin Hart, and he starts a podcast and boom, it's number one all of a sudden. Like that's a big irritation of mine is when these celebrities just jump on board and they're like, not saying like they're kicking the other people in the nuts just to do it, that's been doing it for years. So yeah, I'm gonna try. I'm hoping it's going to stick because I really have a plan with what I want to do if we can open it up.
My husband just asked me today if I wanted to get a vinyl player. What's so crazy is I worked at a record store in high school called Ground Zero Records in Louisville, Kentucky. There was a big music scene in Kentucky.
Did you grow up in Kentucky? I was just over in Louisville like 3 weeks ago.
I did.
That's cool.
Yeah. So did you ever check out like the Bardstown Road area?
No, I was supposed to go meet up with Dano, and we had some meetings we were going to do together, but it fell through. So I was there like a day, so I really just drove through. It was like, hey, we're gonna meet today. No, okay, I'm going home. Pretty much,
Aw. Yeah, so there used to be a huge store
Mm,
there, Ear Ecstasy, and they would, buy back
right.
used vinyl. And so my mom really didn't like that stage of my life of going to local shows and playing all these punk rock records and stuff. So when I came back from college, I like sold my entire collection back to Ear Ecstasy, and now Ear Ecstasy went under, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, that was such a bummer. It was a really cool store, and they had shows there and merch, and it was like a whole movement. It just really reminded me of my childhood. So I'm getting ready to move to Houston, and my husband was
Okay.
also like into the alternative scene. And there was a guy that he listened to on the radio during his childhood. And we just went and checked out 4 schools and 4 days where we could potentially send our kids. And we stopped at the record store, and it
Oh
was still in
wow.
existence. And the guy that my husband listened to was there. He was like,
Yeah,
oh, when
that's
we move
crazy.
back to Houston, we are going to go take that guy out. I was like, oh, I want to have him on the podcast.
That
Yeah,
reminds
but
me.
when you have a podcast, it gives you the platform to be able to have conversations with all these rockers from your past. I was even saying, I don't know, like if you've heard of Minor Threat.
Hmm.
Did you ever listen to them?
I know who you're talking about. I don't listen to them like on a
Yes, I
daily
was like, oh
basis.
my God, I'd love to interview like the lead singer of Minor Threat, Ian McKay. I,
Hmm.
I got to try to find some of these old punk rockers and see if I can reach any of them. Like, how legendary would that be?
That's the craziest thing that I found on this podcast is that I grew up in a country music household. Everything else was
Oh,
considered
cool.
devil's music until I got
I
to like
saw
my
you were a
late.
fan of Hank Williams.
Yeah. So, and it's crazy that I can get these people that I listened to growing up on the podcast. And it's just, and you become friends with these people. And it's like, if I would have just ignored this and finished out my college instead of dropping out, then none of this would have been possible. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Good for you for teaching yourself this. I mean, I totally encourage creativity in my own kids. Like, I have a 13-year-old son with a YouTube
Hmm.
channel, and
Oh,
he
wow. Okay,
plays
cool.
Minecraft, and he's part of all these like scrim communities. And I think it's good to know how to navigate all of
You
that. And
know,
he's got a mic, and he's got a PC, and he's recording himself, and he came up with an intro and an outro and knows how to drop in the music. Oh my
hey,
God.
that's at 13. That's kind of, but I will say this, I'm only 24, and I have found that there are like 10-year-olds that are miles smarter than me technology wise. It is like my 7-year-old cousin, maybe. I couldn't figure out how to do something on my phone. She took it and she said, here, and she did it. And I was like, I've never heard of this in my life. It's crazy.
Yeah. My 11-year-old is like teaching me how to do transitions on TikTok. She like rolls her eyes at me with,
I don't even know how
she's
to
like,
do
oh,
transitions on TikTok. I just record myself in like 4 different videos and put them together.
she's like, Mom, you put your arm up like this and then you pull it down. She's like, oh, out of frame. You know?
But I want to say this, good for your son for wanting to do a gaming thing, because that's the new thing. And then
Yeah.
you also encouraging him to do it, because there are I had somebody on the podcast one time, and I literally had to end the conversation because I was just getting irritated because they were like, my son spends all his time on video games. He has like 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's doing this, he's doing that. And I'm like, he's got 1,000 subscribers just for playing a
Yeah.
stupid video game? Like that. And it's like, if you encourage that, that's going to keep them to going. And pretty soon, that's going to be their job. I mean, people make more than a
Yeah.
Hollywood movie star playing video
Oh, yeah.
games. It's
Isn't that crazy?
crazy.
It's really a community. Yeah, it is.
Now,
And it's a whole nother language.
if I was better at video games, I'd be doing that too. But I suck at video games.
Yeah. You know how we bond? I watch him play it.
Right.
If you want to get in their world, you got to like what they like.
So I want to know, Reena. So your first job out of college was Jerry Springer Show, which was around what, 2001, 2002, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. What's crazy is I went to Purdue and I was working for an NPR station reading the news and the weather.
Mm,
And I thought I wanted to work in radio. And so through the alumni office, I got an interview at WGN and I drove from Indiana to Chicago for an interview at WGN. I
mm,
didn't get the job. And on the same drive up there, I saw a flyer that Jerry Springer was looking for interns. So I walked from WGN over to NBC Tower and I told them I had an interview with the intern coordinator. I got through security, ended up interviewing there and getting the job and starting there 2 weeks later. So that was completely unplanned.
mm.
And
What was your job
yeah,
title there with Jerry Springer?
well, I went from intern to producer in one season. So I really worked my way up. I started off as an intern where I was taking out the guests and entertaining them with petty cash around the city. And what was great is I was new to the city too.
Mm,
So, I was eating at the different cafes and going to House of Blues and going to Navy Pier and learning my way around the city and showing the guests around at the same time. So I was
mm,
having a blast. And then by becoming friends with the guest and seeing what made a good story, like who are the stories that the associate producers are bringing to town, then, they put me on the phone to see if I could book any of the stories. And I grew up in Kentucky. My dad worked in a factory. Like the stories weren't that far fetched, right? So I made friends with the people. They wanted to come and meet me. They wanted to come and meet Jerry. I started booking stories. And then by the end of the first season, I got an opportunity to produce my first show. And my first show went well. They gave me a second show. They got me a third show. And then I got promoted the next season to be a producer. So in 8 months, I went from 0 to 80K. I mean, it was insane right out of college.
So explain to me kind of, I love knowing the background. I don't really care what happens on the set. I want to know what happens behind the scenes. It's really interesting to me. What does a producer do on a television show like Jerry Springer? What are the
Right.
duties that
So,
exist?
yeah, the team was a team of three. So we would have an intern, a production assistant, an associate producer, and a producer. And the intern and the PA would try to book some of the stories. The associate producer was really responsible for booking 3 to 4 stories a week. And then the producer would screen those stories and see which ones were the best ones to bring, work on the budget, make sure all the guests want to come, pitch those stories to the executive. They decide whether those are the stories that they want to bring. They also decide the order of who's going to go out first, who's going to go out second, the order of the stories. And then the associate producer would wake up the guests the night before, make sure the limo picked them up, make sure they come to the hotel, bring them over to the studio. And the producer would go through how everything was going to unfold when they got out there. So Jerry's going to ask you this question, then this person's going to come out, then this person's going to come out. So the producer worked with each person so they knew how the story would unfold on stage.
Okay, cool. Now, we all know how Jerry goes. There's always going to be some type of altercation. Now, are you telling these people, hey, amp it up. If you want to do something, do it. Don't be afraid to do it. Or how does that kind of work because I think the show's ended. I don't know if you can say, but.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, we would say, hey, if you hear a sound effect, your story's getting boring. You better go after the other person. You know what I mean?
Really?
If you hear that ding, ding, ding. Yeah, that means it's getting stale. They knew
Okay.
if those sound effects happened that it was, time for some action in the story.
Better start throwing some chairs.
Yeah. But truthfully, when you bring real stories, like for instance, the majority of the stories were love triangles. The majority of the stories were cheating stories, right? So if you have a husband and a wife that have been together for 15 years and you bring the mistress that's been banging on the door for the last couple of years, the wife wants a piece of her, right? Like you don't have to push them that far. That's why we brought those kinds of stories most often, because they were the easiest ones to unfold naturally on the stage. I always liked those. Every time I got a Tennessee or a Kentucky or a Georgia area code, I was like, oh, I'll call those, because the majority of the good stories would come from those locations.
Now, how long were you at the Jerry Springer show?
I was there for a little over 2 years.
Okay, when did the show start to spike in like ratings? Because it was like one of the highest viewed for a while. Was that when you were there or
Yeah,
before, after?
that was right before I was there. But still, when I was there, they were ripping each other's hair out. Their nails were on the stage. We were actually pulling people apart. We were, doing remote shoots with clan people. Do you remember like the Springer Cam where we were like going into
Hmm.
people's houses and things?
Hmm.
Yeah, I was doing some of that run and gun stuff on the street where you're asking for forgiveness later, you know.
Now,
I
who's coming?
remember, yeah.
With the Springer Camp? Who's coming up with these ideas? Is it Jerry himself, or is it just like the creators of the show? They're like, "Hey, we need to amp this up. Let's do something not. I don't want to say
A
risque,
lot of
but
times it's what people call in with. And I mean, like there was one guy who called in and he was a streaker and he wanted to go streak all over Chicago, Did we give him ideas like, hey, do you want to
ah,
go streak on the ice skating rink, or hey, do you want to go streak through NBC Tower, right? Like we might have given him some suggestions, but the original idea usually came from the guest. And that's the thing too, like even though we would type up what they said and help them tell the story in a better way, the stories came from them,
mhm.
you know? Like you can't make this stuff up. It's just like unbelievable what they're calling in with. That's the thing too, after being there for a couple of years, like I was like, oh my God, like does anybody have a healthy relationship anymore? It starts to wear on you. You're like, seriously,
Mhm.
it only could get weirder and weirder in order to raise an eyebrow.
If you can remember, kind of what was your schedule like being a producer on like a show that aired like 5, 6 days a week?
Yeah, so they had, 6 producers and each producer produced one show a week. But it was a very quick turnaround. Sometimes we would have a story that was a backup for weeks and then we'd end up bringing it.
Hmm.
Because sometimes stories would back out and you need somebody to hop a quick flight. But my schedule was insane. Like I literally worked 7 days a week for about 9 months in a row. And then over the summer, we would get paid hiatus, which was amazing. So it's kind of like a teacher schedule, except for longer hours. But yeah, my days were literally running together where, sometimes I'd go in at 9 in the morning. I wouldn't get out until midnight. Were there some wasted hours of smoking cigarettes and eating pizza? Sure. But most of the time you're pounding the phone to try to get the best stories.
Now, I know how Judge Judy works. Like they film like so many episodes in a day and they're done in like 2 months and they're done for the year. Is that kind of how the show was?
Um, they would film a couple episodes in a row. Like there might be, a morning taping and an afternoon taping, but sometimes there would just be one taping in a day. So yeah, we were filming a lot more often. And I know even with Judge Alex, sometimes they would shoot 10 episodes in a day and then, they would take a couple of months off. But yeah, Jerry wasn't like that.
Now,
Yeah, because it was in front of a live studio audience too. So it takes time to fill an audience.
right. Now, when you're doing this, right, you're doing Jerry Springer. There was a guy that used to be a bodyguard, and now is like the biggest Steve Wilkos. He's like the biggest guy now. Was he
He's gotten his
there?
own show now.
Was he there
Yeah, he
when you
was
were there?
there.
Was he a
I worked
bodyguard?
on the pilot. I worked on the pilot for his show. It's so crazy. Like I never thought that
Oh
his
wow,
show
you
would
did.
be like, I
Okay,
think.
so you worked with Steve Wilkos on the show.
Yes, I did. Yes, it's so crazy because I had a relative that was like, I mean, women were in love with him. They all wanted to rub his bald head. And I had a family member that thought he was sexy. And I gave her like this autographed signed bobblehead of his. I never thought that he'd be like 15 seasons into his own show now. I was like, hey, like when you're done with that bobblehead, or if you don't like him anymore, I'll take that back.
You know,
No.
you don't have to comment, but it's just my thought. When I watch Steve Wilkos, I always think that there is at least because it's reality TV, right? It's reality TV. We know everything's amped up. But I think some of those stories that I don't know if they're just so ridiculous, they're hard to believe, or sometimes I'm just like, there's no way that's true because it's just so ridiculous, you know?
I mean, I'll tell you even from, and you'll know this too from doing 400 episodes plus of your own show, like people love to share their dirty laundry. People love their 5 minutes of fame. And a lot of these guests have never been on TV, they come for the whole experience of it. They're big fans of Steve. They're big fans of Jerry, and they know what makes a good guest. The best guests are the ones that are the fans of the show. They know the drill. They know what they're getting into, and they want to do it. So you may think it's far-fetched, but the people that are calling are like, oh, I know what kind of story you guys want, and I've got that story. So we got stories like that all the time.
You worked on Jerry Springer. You worked on the pilot of Steve Wilkos. You did Judge Alex. Yep. You did, let's see,
you did 4 seasons.
Nanny 911, correct?
Yep.
What other shows have you worked on in the realms? Maybe the background, whichever.
Yeah. I worked on a show called Motor Mouth, which was really like a show. It was kind of like one of these car karaoke shows. And basically the premise was, say I nominated you to go drive around in this SUV, but the SUV is like rigged with cameras, and you thought that you were going to go drive around in this SUV and listen to music and let them know you're going to do like marketing research on whether you thought this was a good compilation. But then I hop in the car with you and I am like challenging you to sing to the person in the drive-through or to get out and do a little dance outside the car. These are the things that are like trending on TikTok now, but this was like pre-TikTok. This was pre carpool karaoke, So it was a show, I think it was on MTV or something, and it got picked up for 2 seasons, and it was called Motor Mouth. And it was like, kind of a cross between carpool karaoke and, all these like trending TikTok videos of doing challenges. So that was really a lot of fun. And I was a field interviewer on that show. So I would interview the person who set up their friend to go drive around in the car. And, I would interview the person beforehand, like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what kind of music do they like? Like, how far do you think you can push that person? And then afterwards I'd interview him. So what happened that you didn't think was going to happen? What did you get them to do? Like, do you think they caught on to it? That was a lot of fun. I worked in like 6 different cities, and I was in my 20s, and I got to party afterwards. And that was a great time. What else did I work on? I worked on this other show. It was an MTV show. I worked on a couple other shows, one called Kill Reality, which was an E! Show. It was like a bunch of reality stars that got an opportunity to star in a B movie. So we filmed all these reality stars living in a house together, and then we filmed the making of this B movie. So it was people from like Survivor and Apprentice and Real World and all these shows. But where does the drama happen? In the house where they all live together, and they're all hooking up and they're all getting drunk and they're all, prima donnas. So that was a blast. Stuff like that.
Do you think, now, hear me out, this could be a loaded question, but you've worked in a lot of reality TVs. Do you think, could you do like a USA Network show? Could you produce something like that? Would that be like scripted? Like, would that be something in your like resume that you would want to do later in life, or maybe possibly now?
In my wheelhouse, potentially. So now that I've kind of transitioned into podcasting, what it did lead to, which is really cool, is me producing a couple other shows in the healthcare realm. So where it wasn't USA Today, I have been working with a couple healthcare clients and helping them produce corporate podcasts, which has been really fun because I help them write the intros and outros. I help them come up with creative titles. I help brief the host. I'm on there for the recording. I supervise the edit. So where it's not USA Today, I still feel like I'm getting to use like my creative juices and my production background, and I absolutely love it. I never thought that I'd be working in the healthcare space, but with the pandemic happening and a lot of corporate companies wanting to do more internal communications and podcasts, the opportunity arose, and it's been really, really amazing.
Let me tell you what they should have done. There's this thing taking over TikTok, and it's called the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. Let me tell you what they should have done. They should have taken this thing. They should have taken it, licensed it, and pitched it to one of these networks. And let me tell you something. That would be one of the biggest hits today. Because this thing is taking over every social media like if they would have put it on Steve Wilkos or whoever, who's ever doing all that type of stuff now, that would be like a ginormous, like hitting the ratings. Like it would just
Oh
flip
my
it
God,
up.
his ratings would be through the roof, right? Yeah, oh my God, I have to say, I loved Johnny Depp growing up.
Yeah. What are your
That
what
would have been some good drama.
kind of what are your thoughts on, kind of the trial, what's going on if you've been keeping up to date with it?
I mean, with everything else, right? It's like, it's so hard to
Mm-hmm.
know who to trust, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
always two sides to every story.
Right.
I mean, look what's going on with Hunter Biden's laptop
Yeah.
and his password. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that there was wrongdoing on both sides. That's what I'll
Right.
say.
Right. But I will say
Yeah,
I will say this as well. I'm I can't tell whose side I'm on because I don't really know, because you don't really know what's happened. You're just seeing the side from what social media wants you to see. You know.
exactly. And
So
I believe that social media is edited,
oh,
just as
100%.
reality
Oh my
TV
God,
shows
yes.
are.
But
Yeah, I
I will
mean,
I will say this though, from what social media is telling me, Amber Heard did not hire the greatest lawyers. she hired some she hired some people from off the street that said they were lawyers, I think. I mean, it was crazy.
yeah,
Objecting
your
to their
lawyer
own
does matter.
question. I mean, come on, objecting to your own question. I'm not a lawyer, and I know you can't do that. I know you can't say uh, question and answer twice in the same question. I know you can't say that. I'm not a lawyer. It's like, what is happening?
Oh my God, another one that would have made a good reality TV show. And, there was a Netflix series about it, is the whole Jeffrey Epstein case. I mean,
You just going from these different shows, Jerry Springer, you were doing Steve Wilkos, all that kind of stuff. But here's where I'm most interested at. I'm a little confused on this part. You interviewed, like Howard Schultz and Barbara Corcoran. Was this a different
oh,
podcast that you had, or
I booked them.
okay? That's where the
I
confusion
booked
comes
them
in.
on another person's.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's where the
So
confusion comes in.
I worked for Kathy Heller
Okay,
on her show. And when I started working for her, I think she was at like 4 million downloads or something. And she had already built a pretty sizable audience.
mm,
And what's interesting is Howard Schultz was getting ready to speak at my alma mater. I went to Purdue,
okay,
and I had gotten a letter that he was going to speak there. So then I responded to the person through the Alumni Foundation at
got you,
Purdue.
got you.
You have to be crafty in how you reach
Right,
these people. So I felt like I had an in. He
right,
was
yeah.
speaking at Purdue. I went to Purdue. He was also at that time considering running for president. And so a lot of it is timing and booking these hard to reach people. So I reached out through my school. At the time, he wanted more coverage because of potentially running. And, I just got lucky. I reached the right person at the right time, and she had the right audience. And so I booked Howard Schultz on her show.
That that
Same with
is
Barbara Corcoran.
that's
Yeah.
100% factual when you say you have to find your way in, because like for us
Hmm.
for us here, we have a coliseum, and all these people, the big country stars, big people come, comedians. That's how I got a lot of my guests were like, hey, look, I have the biggest podcast in the state. You're not going to find another podcast like me. I'm looking for, and here's the catcher. Here's what a lot of people don't realize. If you say you need like a 5 to 15 minute interview, they're quicker to book that than saying I need a half an hour interview. It's
Oh,
and then
a hundred
if you
percent.
find the right person and you get that 5 minute interview, that 5 minutes is going to turn into 45 sometimes. That's kind of how, like Upchurch.
Even Jerry Springer.
Right.
Yeah. At first, she was like, how long do you want? 20 to 30 minutes. I was like, that's great. That's fine. David Meltzer, 20 to 30 minutes. Evan Carmichael, 20 to 30 minutes. But Jerry was actually so gracious with his time. And I think because he could see how much it meant to me, and that he started my career and all of what I was accomplishing, and he liked the concept of my show, that he decided to be more generous. But I was prepared for 20 to 30 minutes and okay with that too.
Yeah.
So sometimes, to get these harder to reach people, you take the interview when they're available, the amount of time that they'll give you right then and there. If you get a yes, you try to get on with them as soon as possible.
Now, when you do your podcast, I'm trying to swerve it into the Better Call Daddy podcast. So when you're doing your podcast, do you do research on these people beforehand, or kind of how are you? Okay, you've got Jerry Springer booked, right? You've got him booked 2 weeks away. What are you doing from that time to 2 weeks to prepare for that one podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the beginning, when I started my podcast journey, I was not doing the research like I am now, but I knew that I wanted Jerry for a long time. So I had been listening to his podcast. I had been listening to other interviews where he had been interviewed. Even my other guests knew how much I wanted to interview him. So if they saw that he was being interviewed somewhere, I had other guests that had been on my show send me interviews of Jerry. I was listening to whatever I could find on that guy and taking notes. And after I listened to one interview that disclosed a lot about him that I didn't know, I took notes. I sent that to his publicist. I was like, oh my God, I would love to expand on these 5 points. I didn't know this about Jerry. I love this. This goes in with the theme of my show. So the more personalized the reach out and the more research that you do and that you show your interest, people love that. People love that. You're going to get a much better yes like that.
Right. I do a lot of research on my guests before, just because I want to know exactly how they are when I'm going into them. I hate people that want to do the podcast, but they're not very talkative. It's just, and I know you've had that probably before. It's
where you're pulling teeth.
And you're I'm like, bruh, you wanted to come on the show. Did you not? Your people put you on here. Chat, please. It's 30 minutes out of your life. But when you do the interviews, and you're going to know this too, you realize which questions they're asked every interview and which questions they're not, which points they're not. So you put that in your notes to say, hey, look, they don't talk about this much, talk about it. And boom, that automatically gives them respect. From their end, they have respect for you because they're like, okay, this is not just a 30-minute fandom of a person coming on that's
right.
They enjoy us. They're actually a fan, but they're also legitimately an interviewer, and they're doing a podcast to learn, not to just, you know what I mean? If Jerry Springer talked about his whole time, he had daddy issues or mommy issues, and he talked about that every podcast, you talked about that, he's like, yes, it's in the news, I don't really give a shit about it. But you bring something
also,
up.
if it's already in his bio, already in his bio,
yes,
he's told that time and time again. It's funny because I'm in Toastmasters, and one of my mentors in Toastmasters said to me,
what's that now?
Toastmasters, it's
what's that?
how you get better at public speaking.
Oh, okay.
You do different speeches and you evaluate other speakers. And there's an attorney that's in the group, and she said, what makes your interview stand out is talking about something that only the two of you have experienced together. And the fact that I had worked on that show, I had gone to Jamaica, I had booked guests, I had been there through 9/11, talk about experiences that only the two of us have had together because nobody else has that uniqueness. Right. So that's what made, I feel like, my interview different than other people's, is that we had some history together.
So I don't really want to know your secrets as well. I don't want to give away my secrets, but how do you kind of book these guests on your podcast? What are you saying that's oh, I'm listening now?
Right. Well, I even told you kind of about the Howard Schultz situation. So I have another story like that. Okay. I was working on an event for Gary Vee. I had never worked on sponsorships ever. But I had met his event planner putting on smaller events because I was working at a financial firm and we were doing smaller events 50 to 75 people. And I had hired his event producer to help me on an event. And then she ended up hiring me back. And she was like, hey, these are the brands that we would love to be a sponsor of this event. Do you think you could reach out to the brands? I was like, sure. She gave me no script. All she did was give me these brands that she wanted to be associated with the event. when you're reaching out to people cold, you have to figure out the messaging of what works. And then once you figure that out, it's like rinse, recycle, repeat. So what my strategy was name drop the other big sponsors who they may have heard of that are already on board, right?
That's the easiest way to do
it. Well, and you use your bragging rights.
Right,
so
right,
this event producer has produced other events that have gotten 2,000 people in the room. She's had other sponsors at past events like X, Y, and Z. You know, we don't have an airline yet. You could be the only airline represented, right? So one, you want to make them feel like an A player. Two, you want to name drop the important people in the room. Three, you want to brag about the number of people that this could potentially reach. So when I'm reaching out to hard to reach people, now I've had some other celebrities on my show. I've had some hard to reach people on my show. So I have some bragging rights. Hey, I'm a top 1.5% podcast. I've had Stephen Covey, Jerry Springer, Judge Alex on my show. I've had some musicians. I've had a top chef, you know, and you have an interesting daddy story. You know what I mean? Like, you weave in what you can brag about.
You know, one of the coolest things for me doing my podcast, and I want to know the coolest thing to you that's ever happened to you. I'll give my explanation to kind of give you an example. So I had a chef on as well. She was in the newest, it was called Next Level Chef. It was a Gordon Ramsay show on Fox. Season 1 had just wrapped. I was like, you know what? This is a hot show. It like got renewed for like 2 more seasons instantly. So I got all like the top 10 chefs, all their emails, and I was sending out to every one of them. Because if you send out to 10 people, you're generally going to get 2 responses back at the most, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I reached out to her, and she come back on. She was like, hey, I would love to do the show. Then I put it on Twitter, and my Twitter had blown up. And I said, what has happened here? You know, because I never used Twitter. Gordon Ramsay had liked my tweet that she was on there.
Oh, yeah.
And it blew.
Nice.
And Gordon Ramsay is like one of the people that I'm looking up to. Like, I'm like, oh, that's a god right there, you know. And
I saw that you had liked him. Yeah, my oldest son.
Crazy. It was crazy.
He loves him too.
I want to know, even though it never happened on the show, it happened outside the show. What's one of the coolest experiences you've ever had on your show like that?
So 2 in response to that came to mind. One was I watched this reality show, Indian Matchmaking, with my daughter, and we totally Netflix binged that show, loved it. And like you said, we reached out to all of the major people that were on it. I got 4 yeses. And so I did 1 week of an Indian matchmaking takeover where I interviewed 2 girls and 2 guys that were on the show. And my daughter got to ask some of them questions, and I loved that. That was really cool that I got that many responses. So that kind of reminds me of what you did. And then another thing was I interviewed Judge Alex, and in the background of that interview, he had a picture of George Foreman. And I was like, oh, cool. You know, my dad loved George Foreman. That's cool. You know, how'd you get that? And he was like, oh, well, his daughter worked on the show. And he talked about Georgetta, his daughter, during the interview. So I tagged her in the interview because he mentioned her. Right. And then she ended up messaging me. And my dad loves George Foreman. So I was like, how cool would it be to interview the daughter? Because she's a daddy's girl too.
Right.
And I connected with her through Judge Alex. So that was similar.
You know, those judge shows, me and my mom, when we were growing up, you know, I was sick from school. We would watch those shows all the time. And they're just craziness upon craziness. Like, it's like Judge Alex was there. What was it? Joe Brown? Was one of them? Joe Brown, Mathis, and of course, Judge Judy. You know,
People's Court. I grew up on People's Court.
Court. Divorce Court. Which
I worked on that too.
I think Divorce Court is the most weirdest, because they're going for a divorce, and then she goes, you know what, I'm not going to grant you a divorce. Work on this for 2 months. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that? So I went from casting for Judge Alex and Hot Bench, and then I tried Divorce Court, and I had just had a baby, and I had the baby like strapped to me in a Bjorn, and I was handing out flyers to be on Divorce Court right outside in the court area of where you file. Like, that's where they would get the stories from, is when people are getting ready to go file. So I was like, handing out flyers like, do you want to be on the show?
Like, okay. So I got you. So what you're saying is you were standing outside of an actual court for people going
Yep.
in for divorces, and you were handing out flyers
Yep.
saying, "Don't get a divorce
Hey,
now.
do you want to
Let's
be
take
on
it to
television?
TV." Ah, got you. Now that's
I
fascinating.
did that. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And with Judge Alex, a lot of people don't know that when you file a small claims case, that is public information. Like, the fact that I was working on a court TV show, all I had to do is show proof that I was working on a court TV show, and I had access to anybody that was filing a small claims case. Those cases are public record.
Now, can
And
I ask you this real quick? I don't want
yeah,
to interrupt you, but here's my question when it comes to this, because you may have we're going to lead into it, but my question is, so they are public knowledge, right? Small claims,
yeah,
public knowledge. Anybody can get it as long as you show
yes,
proof of anything. Now, when they're going on, you can't answer for any other judge show. Let's just use Judge Alex because you can't answer for that.
yep.
When you're doing Judge Alex, are these cases that are coming on the TV show, are they already been, have they already been
Tried?
tried and
No,
solved out of court?
no.
So what you're
You
seeing
have
in
to
Judge
get them
Alex
before
is
they've been
100.
tried.
Got you. So they're not just doing it for TV; they're actually doing it for a legit court, just on TV.
Yes, and he is actually a legit judge. He's a lawyer. He
Right.
was a
He was a
circuit
cop
court
before, right?
judge. He was a cop, and his decision went. So
Okay,
yeah, it was tried on the show.
got you. That's fascinating. That's not going for everyone, but for Judge Alex, that's kind of cool because he seems like a cool dude. Like Judge Judy, she
He
seems like a
is.
jerk, but
You know what's funny? I actually interviewed with Judge Judy and didn't
really,
get the job. Yeah, and
I
she said
assume
that
it's a
she doesn't
character.
hire Springer people.
Oh wow,
What?
okay. I assume it's just a character, but maybe it's not. Maybe she's really just set in her ways.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, your show is any more redeeming than Springer. Like,
Right, right. She doesn't hire
you know?
Springer people. Woo. Ooh, all right then.
What's interesting about that, though, is there's always change of management. So I interviewed at Judge Alex when he had started in Houston. They flew me from LA to Houston to interview when that show was just starting. But I was a new post-production supervisor. I think I'd only had like one post-production supervisor credit under my belt at the time. And I was up against somebody else who was much more seasoned. So I didn't end up getting that opportunity. Then like I ended up working on a couple more shows. I had a few more shows under my belt, and the show moved from Houston to LA. I had already met my husband and gotten married, and we moved back to Kentucky for a couple years, and they were looking for researchers. So I ended up getting hired on that show like 5 years later, different executive producer. And then I worked on the show for 4 seasons. And now I had my own podcast, kept in touch with some people on the show, and ended up interviewing the host. I mean, how insane is that?
It's full circle.
Very.
Full circle.
And that's how Hollywood works too. I've had a bunch of people on my show that, have given me a leg up in my career or kept in touch with me or climbed the ranks themselves. And it's been so awesome to catch up with different people on my show. Like there's one girl who I had on, and she's married to the executive producer of Jackass, and her and I like worked
Oh,
together on
cool.
Nanny 911. We worked together at VH1. She was an intern dating her boss. I was an intern dating my boss at one point. We kind of bonded over that. And now she's, had a blog called HollywoodHousewife.com. And she had a very successful podcast, and now she's gotten a 2-book deal. You just never know who that secretary is that's going to become an executive producer, or that production assistant that's going to end up on late night TV because he kept hustling and writing scripts on the side and busting his chops.
I always have a thing here on my show, which is I try to keep in touch with the guest on as possible. Because, for one, I don't want to seem like a jerk and just say, I want you on just for clout. Just to, you know what I mean? I try to keep up. Like, hey, if you have anything new come out, we'll get you on. But, I find it the respect thing, to keep up. But don't, because I have a tendency when somebody says, hey, you've got my number, let me know when you need me. And then I'll need them for like weeks and weeks. And I'm like, hey, bro, you got to calm down a little bit. I just have that tendency. But so kind of as we wind down here, we've been going almost an hour. Your podcast, Better Call Daddy. How did that come about, wanting to do a podcast, and where did the title come from? Besides the fact that you call your dad all the time, what was the hey, let's call it this?
Yeah, I mean, my dad seriously has wanted a show like always. And I had worked behind the scenes of
Mhm.
others for about 20 years. And I was like, I had co-hosted another show called Next Level People.
Okay.
Like I said, I had worked in radio. I had worked for other podcasters, booking them different shows. I was like, I know that my dad won't back out. Like he's my number
Mhm.
one cheerleader, my number one fan. So I wanted to kind of make him a co-host.
Mhm.
And the whole reason I put together the show was because I wanted to get better at interviewing, better at marketing, better at writing, all of those things. And then my dad, the reason I called it Better Call Daddy was kind of like a tribute to him. And I knew that he would be able to summarize my thoughts well. So, because we're so close, we talk to each other all the time. And so I'm like, oh, he could be like my final thought. Like he doesn't have to be a part of every interview. That's the part that I can get creative on. I can use my casting chops, my booking chops of finding the guests that I want to talk to. But then he and I can like reflect on it afterwards and I can like include him in it and kind of have that intergenerational piece, like add my daddy's wisdom and share my daddy's wisdom with the world. And that's kind of what it turned into. Is a lot of people have daddy stories. They have daddy drama, they have absent daddies, they have sperm donor daddies, they have daddies that have passed away, or I've it's taken like this interesting spin
Mhm.
because everybody has a dad, right? And a lot of people have interesting daddy stories. I've had incest present itself. And, I had a kid reach out to me today that's 15 and his dad died when he was 9. And so I'm like, wow, I'd love to hear a teenage perspective.
Mhm.
And I interviewed my grandmother, my father's mom. She wanted to tell her story. I had somebody who was left in an orphanage, left on a doorstep. I've had so many different interesting daddy stories present themselves as well. So not only am I, re-exploring my reality TV show past, but it has kind of a nice family element to it too.
So if you could just give a quick synopsis of what your podcast is about, is it just is it like you're just interviewing people like I am just interviewing you, getting information, or is it about people that do intentionally have father, issues?
I do like inspirational father stories, daddy drama stories, daddy issue stories. And, I like people who might need some direction in their life and might like to hear from another generation. Like, what would my dad's take on
Mhm.
diversity and inclusion be? Would my dad's take on the change in manufacturing be? Like, my dad worked in the manufacturing industry for 30 years, and since it's gone into the cloud, what would my dad think about, technology and manufacturing? I mean, there's been so many different subjects that I've broached with my dad. I think it's interesting to add another generation to the interview.
So now when you are you just so jaded by reality TV working on it for so long? Can you still watch it? Like, is there things that you just like I watch, or you just kind of like
Oh, I'm
I'm kind of
totally entertained by it.
really okay.
I'm totally entertained by it. Actually, I have a upcoming interview with one of the nannies from Nanny 911. I've had a couple of the nannies from Nanny 911 want to be on, and I think that that's
Awesome.
really cool. That was another chapter of my life for 4 seasons. Yeah, no, I actually still like reality TV. Do you?
Uh, Depends, like when I like the reality, I don't really care for the MTV type of reality, like the Teen Mom. My reality is kind of like game show wise. I guess that makes if that makes sense, like the game show type reality. Because we all know with reality, there's a little bit of fakeness in it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's always just thrown in. It's like, sure, game shows are fake too, but could we all dream about winning $1 million by opening up a briefcase? You never know.
Oh yeah, I loved that one. I still watch Wheel of Fortune with my grandmother. I grew up on Jeopardy. I watched all my grandmother. Oh my gosh, she loved game shows, so I have a love of them too.
What's one game show you could go on that you know that you could absolutely demolish everybody else in?
I think I could probably win Price is Right. I mean, I'm a mom of four, so I do a lot of shopping,
Yeah.
and I love all of those games. I would probably be pretty on the money with those.
I could do that
What about you?
beat Shazam. You ever heard of that with Jamie Foxx where like you got to be faster than the Shazam like so I'm like this gigantic music nerd. Like for some reason I know a song. Well, depending on what genre you go to, I know a song within the first 5 to 10 seconds without even words, you know. I think I could get on there and kill some people on that show and make some pretty fair money doing it just from listening to music. I mean, it's crazy.
Wow. You should audition.
I don't know. I don't know. Cause then I'd be talking all this smack, and then I get there and I suck. They give me like some jazz shit or something, and I'm like, I don't know jazz. And I'm just then I have to come back and admit defeat and be like, I wasn't as good as I said I was.
Aw. You never know unless you try.
Never know unless you try. You reading any good books lately?
Oh my God. I had a feeling you might ask me that. So I had one right here. I just started reading The Dance of Anger. It's a woman's guide to changing the patterns of intimate relationships. And the one thing that I just read last night that stands out to me is that if you put a rat in a maze, if they run into the wall, how many times before they reroute themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet as people, we can run into the damn wall how many times before we reroute, right? I mean, our interactions with some people are repeat again and again and again, and we don't change how we approach situations, right? Until sometimes we're forced to.
Yeah.
So I want to think about that more. Like, I'm getting ready to go through a really big change. My husband just got a job in Texas, and we're leaving Chicago after a decade. It's been a huge adjustment where, you know, my husband is working Monday through Thursday in another state, and he's flying back on the weekends to be with me and the 4 kids. It's been crazy. And I definitely may have planned things differently if we were to do it all over again. But, in order for my kids to have an easy transition, and in order for me not to go completely crazy, I can't really necessarily freak out like I want to, right?
Yeah.
So I'm having to pause. I'm having to think about how can I make this transition the best for everyone? And how can I part with some of these things that I've been hoarding for years? What do we need? What do we not need? You know?
Yeah. Now, are you the type of person, can you read multiple books at a time, or you have to just focus on one?
I used to be the kind of person that can only read one at a time, but as a mom who has very little time, now if a book really takes my interest, I might bounce back and forth between a few. We were just on vacation and I found a couple books that I was like, oh my God, these are amazing. But they're like murder mysteries, and you just,
Right.
they were just so good. So I read a couple of those and then I bounced back, and yeah. So now I can read multiple books at once. There's another one of someone I'm getting ready to interview. It's called A Blind Pony, or The Blind Pony by Samantha Hart.
Okay.
And her story is insane. She ran away from an abusive home in her teen years, and she ended up making it out to LA. And now she's been responsible for some, just cult films like Dazed and Confused. And she's worked on so many Academy Award winning productions. And she's a major rags to riches. I love personal true stories like that. Those usually grip me.
I I recently just joined the ebook group where you just go from ebook group. I'm just saying, I'm using that as a cool term. I stopped buying hardcover books and just started using my iPad, just because I realized I'm running out of room for books.
I'm going to have to give away a lot
Because
too.
I'm like an avid reader. I'm reading multiple books at one time. But I'll tell you, this one book I'm reading now, I had to stop every book I was reading to read it because it's just so confusing. It's this
Oh, really?
David Herbert Donald wrote a Abraham Lincoln. It's supposedly the greatest biography ever to be written about Abraham Lincoln. Now,
Oh, my husband would love that.
let me tell you why it's so confusing. Because back in the 1600s, let's just say, okay, you have 4 kids, right? You've got 4 kids. Let's just say 3 of them are boys and 1's a girl. 2 of those.
That's right.
Okay. Well, 2 of those boys are going to be named David. The other one is going to be named Herbert, and the girl is going to be named Sarah. So you got two kids named David, a father named David, all in the same household. So a paragraph is saying David went out to the park. What damn David are we talking about? Are we talking about the brother, the other brother, or the father? And so you'd have to backtrack a lot because he would use these innuendos of like David and use like quotations market or something like that, to understand which one it is. And I was like, you know what? Let's stop what I'm reading and I'm going to focus on this because I am like losing my mind over this book.
Yeah, that's hard.
Let me tell. Have you ever heard of Malcolm Gladwell?
Oh, yeah. He's an
Okay.
amazing writer.
That guy is one of my favorite nonfiction writers of all time. Like any book he
Oh,
comes
yeah.
out with, I'm definitely going to read it. So this leads to my next question about. So he has a book called David and Goliath, and it's about he goes into the depth of the David and Goliath story. We all know David took on David, or Goliath hit him with a stone. End of it, right? Well, in the book, I don't know if you've read it, but if you haven't, what happens is he takes that story and he says, "Okay, here this could have happened, but let's make it into today's term of how this happened." So David knew that he had to do this. So he took up a stone, he did this, he did this. There was another way he could have done it. But he knew if he would have done it that way, he would not have been as successful as the route he took. So
Hmm.
my question is, what is one thing that you've done that you were going to go one route, but you decided not to and took the other route and it ended up being the best for you?
Hmm. That's a good
That's a
question.
long-winded question, but
I got to think about that. Well, I will say one of my biggest moves was I mean, I met my husband on like a dating website. I was kind of at the peak of my career.
Mhm,
I'd worked on Nanny 911 for
mhm.
3 seasons. I was 26 years old. We might have gone on like 8 dates or something. He was in grad school. He was like in his PhD program at Berkeley. And my boss from Nanny 911 was getting ready to go on to Dancing with the Stars. This was going to be the first season of Dancing with the Stars. And I didn't know if
Okay.
that show was going to get picked up. Right. And so I decided he wanted to get married and just move to Berkeley and live in a studio and leave my career. And um, that was a crazy choice. Like, I could have gone on to Dancing with the Stars. He could have finished his PhD. We could have gotten to know each other better. But instead, I like left Hollywood, took my savings. He ended up getting his master's instead of his PhD. I was like, you want to get married? Get a job. You know what I mean? I was like, forget this grad school thing. But
Yeah.
like, I moved to San Francisco. I didn't know anyone. And it was a really tough transition. I went from like being independent and having a career and an exciting career and thinking that I was ready for that next chapter. But, looking back, it worked out, but that first year of marriage was very fly by the seat of my pants. And I feel like I'm doing that again right now. Like my husband, got this new job, quit his job, which he has never done in 15 years. Like he got an offer and quit in like the same day. He was like ready for a new experience. He felt like our Chicago chapter had expired and he wanted something different. And he didn't so much ask me. You know what I mean? I guess he just thought that like the 4 kids and me would just go. And so we are getting ready to have an adventure. And you know what? It might not have been exactly like how I would have planned it, but I am excited about it. And I know in order to up level that sometimes you just have to fly by the seat of your pants.
There you go. Well, you can check out Better Call Daddy on all podcasting platforms. Is it also on YouTube? I don't want to leave that out.
Yes.
Okay.
However, I don't put all of my episodes on
Okay.
YouTube, just the select ones that have high quality video and want to
Okay.
be there.
Okay. So, Better Call Daddy on all podcasting platforms. It's going to be down in the episode notes below. You can follow Reena on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
Reena Friedman Watts. It's the same thing on Facebook and LinkedIn as well.
All right. Well, Reena, look, I appreciate your hour plus we've done here. Sorry about the technical issues we had, like right in the middle. Like it was just boom, it happened.
It happens. Good old Zoom, baby.
But I do appreciate you jumping on here. This will be up tomorrow, and I will tag you, of course, on all of the social medias that I have you on, whichever it is.
Thank you so much, Dylan. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I would love to have you on the Better Call Daddy show too.
Hey, I'm a good interview. I'm not gonna lie.
Hey, I like your sound. I like your vibe. I know I'm not going to have to pull teeth. Let's do it.
All right, I will. I look forward to doing that show. I'm a big fan. That's why I reached out. I was like, this is a bomb podcast. I really enjoy it. So,
Aw, thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you for joining me here on the show. Once again, you have just witnessed the worst interview you'll ever have in your career of being interviewed. I know I'm not the best at doing this crap. I know for a fact I'm not. I'm terrible, actually.
I enjoyed it.
Well, you're one of the only ones. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. But
No, truthfully, like if I could do anything, I love creating content. I love
yeah.
connecting with other content creators. I think that everybody helps you tell your story in a different way. And I loved your vibe. Thank you so much for hopping on in such a quick, fly by the seat of your pants manner. That's the best.
You've always got to be ready for stuff like this. Always have to be. Always have to have an open schedule, even if it's booked. So.
Exactly.
Well, Reena, I will let you go and tend to your family, but I appreciate you once again for jumping on the show. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Yep. You have a good one.
You too.
All right. Bye.